cannot afford to miss a single moment of the next hour. Get ready to have your ideas about sexuality, love, and relationships blown wide open. It's time to get educated, entertained, and enlightened, as well as sexually empowered. You have now tuned into the Tantra Love, Sex, and Intimacy Show. Now, here's your host, Tanja Diamond.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you. And I'm not actually seeing you, but good to hear from you. And I'm not actually hearing you, but I'm talking. So that's how we're going to start today. I have an absolutely astounding guest sitting here across from me today, and it's David Brooke. And what makes David Brooke special? I mean, other than he's a very handsome man, which always makes my day, and he's very dynamic. I'd like him to say hi to you guys and tell you a little about what he does.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Brooke, also known as the Brooker. I am currently, my little catchphrase there. I'm currently doing speaking and teaching and writing, which is quite a departure for me. I've had a kind of interesting career in retail, real estate, a lot of different things. And so now I've taken this 40-year passion, Tanya, since 18 on about being Tony Robbins Jr., and I'm going to do it. And I just... this idea of having an impact on so many people in my life, which is why I'm so interested in what you do, is something that's been calling to me for 40 years, and it's going to start happening. And actually, it is right now.
That's awesome. And, forget Tony Robbins Jr.
Yeah, well, give somebody a visual.
Just go for the gold. Yeah. Go for it all. Because that's what that's, of course, my dream is the female counterpart.
Right. Oh,
so,
right.
yeah,
right.
all headed for that, impacting people's lives, which is an amazing thing to do.
You bet.
And so you've got quite a resume here. He actually gave me his resume, which I really enjoy. But I've got to say, the biggest thing that when I'm looking at David here that I want to say is, we were talking when we first met, because we just met, is how incredibly present he is. And I know on this show we talk about how, as a man or a woman, you can show up for your partner and what that actually means. And David has this great ability to just look right at you. Just look right at you and see you. And it's just genuine. I mean, if you could be sitting here in the studio, you would just enjoy this so much. This is a very genuine man.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And today what I want to do is talk about men and sex.
Sure.
And David's willing to do that, so that's awesome. That's very fun. So you're married now.
Yes, I am.
In the last couple of years, yes. And
yes,
ladies, he is married. Apparently went to his reunion just recently and was...
It was fun. It was a great experience. So.
Having to convince women, yes, he's married. And but before that, you had dated like a ton at some point in your life, right?
A lot of women. I had a good probably half of my life, Tanya, I was single. So there was a lot of women in the picture. But I also think it was interesting how, as we talk about this subject, there's some people that just get started early and some not so early. And I remember in kindergarten telling Allison McGee I wanted to marry her.
Wow.
And so it was early.
Okay.
It was early.
Now, do you count those as dating?
No, that's not one of the number. But it's...
and you have a high number. What you were talking about, 300, 400?
200, 400, something like that.
Yeah.
That was, now, mind you, this is dating. And there isn't, I don't always get to other numbers.
Right,
but
right.
What was so neat about it, and it gave me such a breadth of examples, experience, types of women, relationships, all that type of thing, where you can speak from such a point of having all these different types, rather than I've had a lot of friends, Sonia, that have had one or two girlfriends or boyfriends, and that's it, and you just don't have much of a point of comparison. So it's been very, very helpful. Not a lot of sampling, yeah.
Now, on your website, you said you were a productivity coach.
That's what I'm really focusing on now, and it's really how to be more productive in your personal life, business life, and certainly some other lives as well.
And I was going to say, you can see why I asked that question, because if you're going to date 400 people, you got to be organized.
Well, that's very true. It's like that when you get a little bit sleepy at a certain end and you call them out by a different name. That was never good.
No, that's not a good thing.
Right.
So, one of the things that I noticed about you right off the bat when we talked was that you actually like women. And that confused you. You looked at me kind of like...
I did, yeah.
Like, duh. But, there are so many heterosexual men out there right now that don't actually like women. And they think they might because, they're designed evolutionary to, of course, go have sex with women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard drive. But to actually like women is a more rare thing.
And you know what I find interesting, too, I often wonder if that's tied more to kind of the emotional scale, if you will, because we were talking earlier about how I've known people such as my father who never cried a tear,
right,
who all the way to never expressed themselves to, I'm somebody who's always cried easily, never been ashamed of it my entire life. And I often wonder, is that a connection between the two?
Well, what happens is that most men get wounded, and I believe that most men are way more sensitive than women are. And I believe that most men carry their wounding a lot deeper than women do. And I believe that as mothers, we do a lot of that wounding. And it starts with little boys who are trying to help their mother, and they're just not as mature or fast enough or whatever. The mothers are stressed, and they'll say things like, oh, never mind, I'll do it myself. Right. Now, yeah.
And I was going to say, Tony, I think another thing that I think really ties in that is emotionally is also, as well as, I think women are much tougher than men. I think that's been big. I mean, these captains of industry I know that would call me just a blithering just because they'd broken up with somebody, and it was like, what is wrong with you? I don't know how I'm going to go on. This is terrible. And she'd already gone on to her next date or next boyfriend. It was
well, it's also because we're as women, we're evolutionally designed to be tougher. I mean, we had to have babies. We had to move along and do that with the pain and all the rest of that. But I think that men grow up fearing women. Really more, fearing their mothers or fearing women, that first rejection of the first kiss, or the playground where you say, I'm going to marry you, and she's like, so whatever. Not in a million years.
She was the smart one. We're too young, David. Very good, Allison. Gosh.
That was perfect.
I should have thought of that one.
But I think that then there's a lot of charge. There's a lot of emotional charge that men carry into their dating relationships and later on into their life. So even though they're designed and drawn to a beautiful woman or wanting to be with a woman, I think there's a lot of fear behind it. And so I think when you, as a man, if I ask men, if you're listening right now, to think about when I say the word woman, what does that mean? A lot of men in my workshops will go, controlling, bitchy, scary, dominating, all of these things, unsatisfied, not able to satisfy them, all of these things.
Well, I wonder also if it goes back to the part of, I always remember the dialogue, but it was kind of a monologue in the beginning of When Harry Met Sally. And we pretty much always want, as Billy Crystal tells Meg Ryan. And that was never a factor for me. And I also think another thing that men could maybe look at is how many friends do they have, just friends? And then if, in any case beyond that, how many friends they have that are women.
Right.
I've always had a lot of men friends, and I've always had a lot of women friends. But I wonder if they were not the object. Certainly, I was as sexual as the next guy and dated all these women and enjoyed every minute of it. But that wasn't always the goal.
Because part of it is you enjoy the feminine. You had a special relationship with your mom.
Very much so. And I think that was a really big one, too. And we talk about now how we've got a divorce rate that's through the ceiling and so forth, and a lot of single parenting.
Yes.
And my mother, when she died, all my life, was my best friend. And one of the things that we talked about, which I think was the foundation for a lot of this, is there was no question that was off limits with her. And I even remember, and of course, the one that's always kind of at the top of the list was the oral sex question. And I remember being...
My gosh, nobody ever asked their parents about that as a rule.
Yeah, and I remember being, I don't want to be wrong on the age, but 16, 17, 18, something like that, and going, Mom, that's strange for me. That's a strange thing. And she starts laughing. She goes, I don't know if I would enjoy that too much myself. But it made it okay. Because I was so comfortable to talk to her about it.
Right. So in your life, women weren't scary because your primary relationship with a woman, being your mother, was safe. And so you look at women then as nurturing, as loving. I mean, what do you think of your mom?
Oh, yeah, just tremendous. And I think also just the idea of the no question off limits, nothing, and that removes all that mystery, we can't talk about that. And even that we talked about, too, with the not always being, as a child, you saw your parents maybe not always with their clothes on in those early years, very comfortable. That was not a big thing to
So there was no charge around women being, mysterious or, scary or anything like that. And I think that's a huge thing. And I don't... Even though I believe, yes, all our programming starts young, and it definitely does, I believe that there is not any time that we can't just decide that we're going to make a change change that. But the first thing you need to do is recognize that pattern is in there. So if you're out there and you're thinking, boy, I'd really like to hook up with more women, and not hook up in the sense of have sex or even that, but get to know women better, think about the charge or what you hold in your body about women. Women are energetically sensitive. Usually if your energy is saying, wow, women are scary, they feel that.
And
hard to be
Tony,
with.
that's such a great point, too, about this making a change, because it does start with, first of all, you have to acknowledge that there's something you want to do different, or you need to make a change, which starts with looking at yourself.
Right.
But it can change in an instant.
Yes.
And we've heard that. And it doesn't seem to me that a lot of people do. I'll give you a real quick story with me. Is when I was working at Nordstrom, and I was a store manager, and I'd moved my way up and so forth. But I don't think I was a store manager yet. I think I was a department manager. Somebody comes up to me one day and he says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And I said, "Well, sure." It was just another employee in another department. You know that the reputation of you around the store is that you think you're pretty cool. And I kind of went, well, gosh, I'm just working hard running this department. I go, well, but you don't really talk to anybody. You don't really say anything to anybody. And that kind of comes across like you think you're a little better than everybody else. And I remember, and this is what made me think of that, because when you mentioned it, is I thought in an instant, I'm going to change this. And from that second forward, as I went up the escalator, walked by, the escalator didn't go any faster if I said hi or didn't say hi to people, and it completely changed it. So you can in an instant, and it starts with recognizing it, but it's just so powerful to make those adjustments.
Well, a lot of people think that change has to take a long time, and I tell people that, you're changing things every single day. Every morning you get up from flat to standing.
Right.
That's a change.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be as daunting. I went vegan 4 weeks ago and basically went from a, pizza, high-fat, Coke diet to raw food in an instant.
Right.
So you can do that. If you're listening to us and you want to call in, you can do so. We'd love to hear from you. And the number is 1-877-230-3062. That's 230-3062. And you can ask any question related to Tantra, love, intimacy, sex, either for David or for I. We'd love to hear from you. And so, so you grew up open when your mom was open. You felt comfortable asking her questions. Yeah, I've never heard anybody talk to their parents about oral sex, except for me. Mm-hmm. I remember saying something to my dad about, my dad was saying something, I don't even know how it came up, but it was something about my mother's period. And I was saying something like, well, you can have sex, right? I was 15, and I was a virgin, but I was saying, you can still have sex during somebody's period, right?
Right.
And my dad was looking at me and he goes, yeah, I do know that. And I said, that's good. You need to stay up with with your education. And my parents weren't like your mother. Mm-hmm. They weren't that open, but I was.
Well, and it makes me wonder, too, if my mom, who's long since gone for about 30 years, it makes me wonder if she was the exception to the rule, and it sounds like she was the exception. Because
Most
I think
definitely.
not only that any question was within boundaries, or that's fine, and again, it took away all the mystery and all the part about this is so you can't talk about this, but it also goes back to that when we were younger, and I mentioned this about before I was up to whatever age, 5 or 6, and I'd see my mother getting in and out of the shower. It was very normal to me.
Right.
And then later I find out that I've had friends of mine that have never seen a naked woman in their life, and I go, but of course your mom. No. So apparently that was quite different than a lot of the
in the States. It's very rare. In Europe, a lot of kids go to nude beaches with their parents. It seems a very normal thing. Here in the States, we've got a lot of energetic charge around sexuality. A perfect story is that my daughter's father, when they were in the tub when she was really young, and she'd be pointing to his elbow, and he had a mole on his chest, and she would point, and he would say mole, and she'd point to his shoulder, and then all of a sudden I hear this shriek, and it's not her, it's him. And he's like, oh, my gosh. And I'm like, I come running in. I'm like, what's wrong? And he's pointing down at his penis and at her, because she's pointing at it. Right. And I'm like, arm, elbow, penis. Arm, elbow, penis. Mm-hmm. Just like it's every other body part on the planet, because until you charge it with a different intent, it is.
Right.
So there he was trying very diligently. He'd say, arm, elbow, penis. And of course, because he had that charge around it, she pointed over and over and over because she was really having fun with his discomfort in that arena.
But it's like what you mentioned, I think you're using the word orgasm, about it's just if it's said, just like any other word, but if we do put that different connotation or that different charge, it comes across much differently.
Exactly. And so all these words, when I'm asked to speak on radios and other places as well, when they ask me to do PG conversations, you can make orgasm, multi-orgasm, penis be a PG conversation as long as you're not embarrassed, as long as you don't have a charge on it that's anything more than educational. And that's how we talk elegantly about sex.
And it's so sad to me because of that embarrassment, because of that we don't talk about that subject. There's so many things that a person's not going to see and not going to be able to experience, which I think is very sad.
Well, that's definitely sure. And we definitely lack getting education or going somewhere to, I've talked to people who say, I know you teach about sexuality and love and spirituality, but, I'd be embarrassed to come talk to you. And it's like, well, where else are you going to go? The internet?
Right.
Who knows what you're getting off the internet? That's not such a great thing. So you love women. I love that about you because it makes me as a woman just feel comfortable, safe, and revered. I feel sexy around you. And you're not doing anything to make me feel that way except honoring that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
And if men got that honoring all women, short, round, fat, skinny, whatever they are, but honoring the feminine, you have so many women around you as a man, you wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting about why that doesn't happen more. And we talked about the mother relationship too, and I feel very fortunate. But it's interesting that I have a handful of friends that are very similar to me.
Right.
And then there's that whole other group that's sort of more into the acquaintance area that just don't get it, and the conversations are completely different.
Well, I think part of it as a man that's difficult is that men feel out of control with their sexual response. And that happens in the teenagehood when all of a sudden puberty hits and you find yourself with an erection at inappropriate times.
Right.
And feeling embarrassed by that or out of control by that. And so I think a lot of men are afraid to be friends with women that they're attracted to because of that feeling inappropriate.
Right.
Whereas as women, if I'm with a man who's my best friend Craig and I love Craig. We have a great sexual energy. I love working with him because I get this nice tingle around him. We're not doing anything. We're friends.
Sure.
But I love being in that energy.
Right.
And I'm not threatened by it. I don't think anybody else is accountable for it.
Right. Well, and I think also, Tanja, that, again, as a male, I've been all my life, so I know how males work and operate, which is sometimes cool, sometimes disappointing. But you just made me think of, I remember being in 7th grade in junior high in Spokane, and I'm in front of the class, and it's David Brooke's going to do his report yet, and we have a problem down here. And I'm just not.
Houston?
This is not going to work. I mean, if I go up in front of this class, so I somehow just sort of worked my way up there, and it was terrible. So then, and then finally, of course, it went away, and I was okay.
Right.
Later in life, I'd have the other problem, and I'd think, well, how come this can't be like when I was back at junior high?
That's right.
Hello, come on, can you perform here, please? But what's so interesting, the other reason why I mention that is because then I take another friend of mine where, as a close friend, this shows you how the relationship between men is not as nearly as tight or as close as we would like it to be. And I remember him telling me, I said, I have to confide, and of course I won't say his name. I said, I have to confide. Have you ever had a problem with where you couldn't perform? I mean, you couldn't really, and he goes, oh, no, never. He's a very close friend.
Right.
And he goes, just never. And I said, oh, really? And then he said a word I've never heard or used or thought of since then. He goes, David, I consider myself way too kingly. I said, kingly. Yeah, like he's the king. And so I thought, so I walked away with my tail between my legs, and I'm just so disappointed. And so it's about a year or two later, I happened to run into one of his girlfriends that I knew very well. And we were somewhere, we're just having a chat, and we're just going along. And, out of the blue, I just kind of go, I have a question for you.
About the king.
About the king. If you don't mind, and she was very open to it.
Right.
I said, can you tell me, was there ever a problem with you two, with him being able to perform? She goes, oh, all the time. And I just went, well, you little. I mean, there was a perfect example that he would never tell me or anybody else, and hence I'm feeling like I'm the most alone guy in the world. And yet I see, frankly, a lot of male friends of mine, or maybe more of the acquaintances, is very similar to that. I can't ever admit that to anybody, and it's such a shame because that you feel better when you know you're not alone.
Well, of course.
And then you can exchange
information.
Thoughts. Exactly.
Right, exactly. Well, so what did you do? How did you feel about that? Well, not only does that happen between men, but it actually happens between partners. Because, here it is. It's an expectation. Women feel like men need to be erect because if they're not erect, then the woman's not attractive.
Right.
So, which is a little bit daunting for everybody. That's a little bit too much pressure.
I would hope, too, that women would understand this. This could almost be like a PSA, is that, trust me, it doesn't always work the way we'd like it to do, and it's no reflection.
Right.
Sometimes I want to go, what is going on here? Hello. This is looking good.
Right,
nothing's happening. But you have no control over it. There's not this little switch you can turn on and off. And so I think women have started to get that a lot more, but I think for a long time they took it very personally.
Right. And then nobody said anything. So, I mean, I do remember the first time that happened with me and a man before I was quite enough to be savvy as I am now. And I'm looking, he's looking, then we're not looking anywhere. Then we're not talking. Then we're just kind of and that's embarrassing for everybody.
Right.
And I'm not quite sure why the conversation can't be something like, for the man's point of view, the man could be saying, wow, we're getting lucky tonight. Do you know why?
Right.
Because first of all, there's this amazing technique called the painting the yoni with the soft on. That is the most amazingly erotic technique on the planet that Tantra teaches about what to do with a soft on, because there's a lot of great things to do with one.
Interesting.
And nobody knows that.
Yeah.
And once you know it, and it's amazing how you can't keep it there, even though you want it to keep it there at that point. The other thing is, how about a man that says, wow, this means we have extra deluxe time in pleasuring you tonight.
True.
Why is the erection the main event?
True. That's so true. I think they've always thought there's an undue amount of pressure on the erection, the orgasm, all those types of things. In fact, I was thinking about this today, knowing I was going to be meeting with you, about how one of the things that always has surprised me, I've really started to understand this idea of advocating for people. And the whole idea is, if I help Tanja to get what she wants, David will do just fine.
Right.
And I've expanded it in my speaking and different areas where I've met with groups and so on. Well, I thought, really, it's not much different here. One of the keys to my success, for lack of a better term, in dating and all those other areas, is understanding if I put her needs first, and I don't meet a lot of men that do this or understand this, if I put her needs first and think about all I want to do is make sure she's happy and she's going to have the best experience possible, well, guess who just says fine? But that doesn't happen very much with men. It's really sad.
No, and I think in a way it does in one way. I mean, men are geared to learn the woman's pleasure map. So I think what happens, though, is men are erroneously thinking that the road to taking care of her is just an orgasm. And it's about, and I say just an orgasm. Right. And I think they also think that there's this, pleasure map. And you've probably done this. You meet a woman and, oh, she likes that, check, sure. check. And what happens then is that becomes a button-pushing sexual performance. Now, for women, a lot of the time, being under that pressure of knowing this man is doing everything possible in the world to make sure I have an orgasm, and you know what? I'm just so not there.
Right.
What are my choices? I can fake one, or I can not have one and actually say, it's nothing you're doing wrong, which, of course, most men don't want to hear because they're sure that it is. So this is it's an awkward thing, too. And I think so what women really want from a sexual experience, and I say they want to be made love to in their souls. And so regardless of the orgasm, if a man like yourself shows up, because you're very present, I'm sure you're right there, you're aware, you hopefully you're enjoying your experience too.
Sure. Because
that's what it's really about. If I feel you enjoying your experience with me,
right,
that's a turn on.
You bet.
If I feel like you're going through a checklist, tweak here, rub there, six to the left, two to the right.
Right.
It takes it away. It just becomes a non-experience.
Well, that's a good example, because it goes back. It reminds me of the teachers we had in our life. This one you have to turn the homework in. This one you may or may not be late. If you get an A in the midterm and final, you get an A. Who cares if you show up? So yeah, you can't be that as you say, the checklist or whatever. But and the women sense it. And the thing that I find interesting is back to the erection or the orgasm, is that the women, at least, there's no visible signs of not getting into the man. That's very obvious. But I think what makes it such a challenge is back to that big word, communication.
Yeah, of course.
If it's just communicated, it'd be fine.
Well, it's all about that. But everybody's afraid, because for a woman, what makes her, she thinks she's hot if she's, wet in an instant and easily aroused and orgasmic, whatever, then she thinks that makes her wanted by the man more, because of course men's sexual self-esteem isn't about it is about giving a woman an orgasm for the most, unless they're very educated. It's all about that, and women know that, and so there are over 37% of women that don't have orgasms.
Wow.
And there are 86% of women that will never have an orgasm through intercourse alone, and yet that's the big thing, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
it.
And so how do we get the men, well, we could talk the women too, but the men educated away from that is not the goal?
Well, I mean, it's a hard one, because that's the biological imperative. Men can't believe that if their ejaculation isn't the most important thing, why it wouldn't be for a woman.
Right.
And it's not until men actually learn ejaculation mastery, how to separate orgasm and ejaculation, do they start to finally get the big picture. And of course, do you know anything about that?
Actually, I don't. I remember you talking about that last time, and I found that really interesting.
Yeah, it's like, something I could teach.
Yeah.
What is that about? New frontiers. Yeah, I mean, there is most of us are operating in level 1 sexual mastery, level 1, which is, I put yours mine here and yours there, and this is what we do. I say level 2 is more like sophistication. The man makes sure he gives the woman her orgasm before he gets his.
Right.
But that falls into button-pushing sex, and after a while, that can be boring.
Right, true.
I mean, if you're doing that 3 nights a week or whatever, eventually it's like, okay, we can have this down in under 10 minutes. Check that box, we're good. Right. Beyond that is where men start to learn about ejaculation mastery. They learn to separate orgasm and ejaculation. They learn to, because it's that moments during, the good thing about intercourse for women is those few moments right before you ejaculate. Mm-hmm. Those real intense moments when you're so present and you're right there and we can feel that energy in our bodies,
right.
And then that's over. And that's
right.
the sad part.
Right.
We don't want to be banged away on for like ever, not like in the porns, that's false. But we want to ride that energy. And so when you can actually make those two separate, ejaculation and orgasm, and as a man have an orgasm that lasts for 3 or 4 minutes, still be erect, right. Still go on after that over and over again, would that be a fun thing?
Oh, of course. I mean, because, well, absolutely. I mean, I think back about, I've always had this sort of same thought I've had since I was a young man, is that minute or two leading up to it, I've always said, if somebody said, could you stop and you can walk down the street and somebody will have $50,000 for you, you just have to go pick it up right now, you go, I'll pass. And then the 30 or 60 or 90 seconds afterwards, I need to mow the lawn. I've got some things to do.
Right.
And just what an amazing 3 or 4 minute stretch or whatever that amount of time might be. So.
Well, the average man only has 11 minutes of orgasm a year.
Wow.
Yeah, all that for that. Wow. So, no, it can definitely be a lot longer. I'm sure you've probably had that experience where you've had an orgasm with ejaculation, which means your ejaculation was like, wow. Mm-hmm. And then those ones that you're like, right. Excuse me?
Well, and another thing, Tanya, when I go back to the various women I've dated over the years, different ages, times, all that kind of thing, is there was a point where I thought, I can't overanalyze this anymore, because there were some that were just so phenomenal, and I think the part that I always use is kind of my sort of benchmark, if you will, is the time frame. It was the 3 or 4 or 5 hours or something like this, whatever it was, it felt like 3 minutes. And you go, you've got this, we started at 10 and all of a sudden it's 3 in the morning and you think it's
right.
like 10 minutes after 10.
Right.
And that kind of, and so knowing that, but I got to the point where I didn't worry about it anymore, because I think, why is it with her or this or that or whatever? Because I didn't want to get into where I was trying to figure out a map or the button pushing, but
right.
there were just some things that, I mean, you always hear that term, died and gone to heaven. It was
right.
just, it was just phenomenal. But
right.
you didn't always have all the pieces as to why it just happened to work.
Right. And how it happens to work generally, and it is duplicatable. That's the cool part. It has to do with breath. Breath, having really? A conscious breathwork practice and learning to be completely aware of your body and there. And if a woman and a man are breathing in synchronicity together and using their breathwork, and sometimes it just matches up, right. And that's why it's like, wow, how did that all happen? And time is suspended. Which is a tantric technique of suspending time, because Tantra is simply the ability to manipulate energy.
Right. So now, is the breathing prior to and having that as part of your during?
It's all of the above. It's harmonized breath. There's a charging breath. Making a CD right now and a DVD on breath work to be used not only in transforming your life but in sexual mastery. And so, but those are the things that all hooked up right. The breath was in sync, the presence, the eye gazing. Everything was right there, and then it creates this huge experience. And
I think also, I've always heard this, the mind or the brain is the biggest sexual organ of all, and people, it's kind of like the skin is the biggest organ of the body. But it's interesting how we got this now, I believe the term is friends with benefits and all this, where
right.
it's absent of any emotional tie-in. And I'm just curious, I don't know if you could have that level that you're speaking of without having a connection up here. I don't see how it could even be close.
No, you actually can't. And we're going to come back in just a few minutes. We're going to take a break, come back and talk more about that spiritual connection with sexuality. See you in a few.
Is your sex life non-existent? Do sexual dysfunctions leave you soft? Is internet porn getting more than you are? Or are you paying more attention to porn than your partner? Have you tried talk therapy and it got you nowhere? You are not alone. You can be freed from sexual shame, guilt, and dissatisfaction. A visit to the Tantra teacher is in order. Call now and mention you heard the Tantra teacher on the radio and get a very special offer. Stop waiting for a miracle and call right now. 206-276-2735. Phone consultations or in person will get you the information you need to be successful in your love life. But you have to call now. 206-276-2735. Stop making excuses. Call the Tantra teacher. 206-276-2735.
Want to get yourself out there? Host a show with Contact Talk Radio. Phone 425-649-1112 or email info@contacttalkradio.com.
Are you one of the 40 million sexless couples in the U.S.? Are you wondering why having sex leaves you feeling lonely? Are you suffering from the myths of sexual dysfunction? Do you know in your heart that there has to be more than what you're currently getting out of making love? To rid yourself of sexual ignorance, get more out of your lovemaking, and find out more about spiritual sexual connection, then you need to check out www.thetantrateacher.com to receive your free copy of the ebook called Secrets of the Tantra Teacher. Don't suffer another minute without the sexual loving and ecstatic bliss you were born to receive. Get to www.thetantrateacher.com right now. That's www.thetantrateacher.com.
Be part of the show. Call now at contacttalkradio.com at 1-877-230-3062.
We're back having this phenomenal conversation with David Brooke today about men and sex, and I have to say that David is an amazing man and contributes a lot of this to his wonderful relationship with his mother, and I would concur. But being in the presence of a man that's completely present, that actually loves women, is an honor. As a woman, I'm quite honored by this experience. So when we were last talking, we were talking about, you had asked me a question about, is it possible to today, a lot of people are having the friends with benefit kind of not a whole lot of emotional component in their sexuality. And you asked me, can you have amazing spiritual sexual connection in that format? Right. And the answer is no. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about Tantra that I'm having to remind people, especially in the West, Tantra has become synonymous, the word Tantra has become synonymous with erotic massage, with sex work, with some breathing. So these people are taking some techniques of Tantra and then calling it Tantra and putting it out there. And so I'll get emails from people saying, hi, here's our naked pictures, we're Tantric, do you want to join us?
Oh, wow.
And it's like, oh, yeah, that's fun. So it's fun. Oh, gee, thanks. But that's not really what Tantra is about. And, you know, you're probably experiencing more tantric connection than you even realize because you don't know much about that word or about that concept, right? And so in sexuality, Tantra is only 3% sex. All the literature written about Tantra, only 3% is sex, even though the word is synonymous with that in the States. And to be truly tantric, in a truly tantric sexual relationship, it takes time. And it takes those connections like you're talking about. You have to be able to really connect to another person. You have to be able to open your heart. You have to be able to be completely congruent in your whole body and not just compartmentalized like most of us have sex. A lot of times people today are having sex with their genitals. And you'd think, well, what else is there? There's a lot more.
Well, and I think it's too bad, of course, because there's so many analogies you could use. And one is as a friend. And I have these many friends. I mentioned the high school reunion I went back to, and that's 40 years ago. But one of the basic keys to those friendships is time. It's just time. I mean, all this time we spent together, and it's trust, and so why would that be any different? That the experience is so much more valuable because you've got all these experiences that you pile on top of each other to have this connection up here.
Well, a lot of it is about pain. People are in fear of being in pain. And so men have this sexual drive, right? Sexual needs that need to be met. And, of course, they are visual, like women are, want to go out and see beautiful things and experience the beauty of a woman. But what happens is I think we're making our sexual arousal and our sexual energy somebody else's responsibility. instead of just saying, wow, I am so hot today, and I'm going home and I'm having a party with myself, you know? And I mean, actually experiencing loving yourself, self-pleasuring instead of masturbation. I look at masturbation as a sexual tension release. Right? A lot of people do that. It's this, you know, down quick, use the porn, whatever you need to do to try to get off, and then you feel better. Oh, my God, thank God that feeling I have in my body is gone. The problem is that we're only experiencing about 2%, and probably even less than that, of our capacity for pleasure. Wow. Most of us believe that pleasure we feel, or that is sexual energy we feel, is too much. It's too much. That's why we're trying to get it out of our body, expel it from our body. You were talking about Tony Robbins, right? He's a dynamic man. And he is using the power of Tantra in his life. Oh, interesting. Using his sexual energy, filling his body up bigger and bigger and bigger, and exploding onto stage instead of exploding out somewhere. So some of the most dynamic people in the world today understand harnessing sexual energy and using it for creativity and other things except just expelling it. Well, and I think that brings up a great point that I've always thought with a few marriages and these various women over time is, it seemed to me so many women didn't understand the relationship between the masturbation and the sexual act. They're two completely different things. And we would get this, well, why do you feel the need to, I mean, aren't we? And I go, it's completely different. These are two different things. And even though I'm not apparently experiencing to the level that I could be too. But I've had that conversation over time, and I always found it interesting. They're two different things. Well, women, because of, depending on what for most women, it's probably not just the masturbation. It's what most men do when they masturbate. I mean, if men are using porn when they masturbate, women, of course, feel inadequate. Oh, that makes sense. That's a huge thing. Okay, unless you're looking at pictures of them, which I always say to men, you know, if that's something you need to do, ask your lady for pictures of her, because I guarantee you it'll be a lot easier transition. A lot more fun. You know, if you're looking, you're a woman's, you know, 5'4" and 150, and you're looking at women that are 6 foot and 100 pounds. She's going to be upset. You know, and the reason, and let me tell you why that is. Women are evolutionarily designed to attract a man by their beauty. And so if a woman feels like you're looking at somebody else, then they must be more beautiful. And if a woman doesn't feel beautiful in a relationship, she's not interested in sex. Oh, that's so this is a huge thing. This is not just because the woman's insecure. Now, granted, there are women that are completely insecure no matter how much you tell them how beautiful they are, whatever, they're not going to believe you. Okay, that's old programming that needs to be fixed, because that can seriously destroy a relationship. In fact, it's interesting, Tanja, again, this group of women over all these many years of dating, I'd say 10% of them had good self-esteem. That was always sad to me. And the most beautiful, the most intelligent, smart, articulate, funny, you name it. Well, that always takes me back to that when men are looking for hot women and they have this certain look, and hot implies sexual. And of course, most of those women aren't. Because they're so worried about how they look and the perfection they need to attain, that they're so uptight in their bodies that they're not actually having a good time at all. True. So it's interesting that we would label that as hot. Well, and I also think the visual part that you just mentioned, women are visual too, but men are more visual. And then, of course, you always see this, it's the classic where the guy becomes famous and he gets the young trophy wife who's real hot. And then you see the really hot wife with the older gentleman who's overweight and apparently supposedly got the big wallet. But it's the attraction to that brain or to that smarts or those things versus just the visual. I'll tell you something that's going to blow your mind. What's that? It's not true. Really? Women are just as visual, but the deal is with a woman, what's more important than how he looks is how he connects to her. Does he make her feel beautiful? Does she feel heard? If a man looks at a woman and says, I want to hear more about what you have to say, that's probably the biggest seduction line on the planet. Okay, I'm curious about you. Oh my God. Okay, has nothing to do with money. Yes, there's some women out there that are after the money, just like there's some men out there that are only after a body. But most people fall in between, and so really what it is for women is, I mean, I have as many women calling me saying, how do I tell my husband he's too fat? How do I, tell my husband I'm not attracted to him anymore? So women still feel the same, but they are more forgiving in that arena. And what I find interesting, that's a very good point, and it's very interesting.
it almost feels like I could do a little thing on how to date. There's all this, the different techniques or the good or bad things, but just one thing alone, I always would ask these many women I dated or that were friends or whatever, I said, what's the biggest frustration with men in the dating, the whole thing? And it was always number one. They never ask me any questions. It's all about themselves. I've gone away from dates, David. The person, I don't even know if they knew my last name. It was that bad, and blah, 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 blah. And if you just show some interest, and we talked about that earlier, I'm just very naturally curious anyway. So I want to find out. I've already lived my life. I don't need to talk about what I've done or this or that. But that's the number one. And don't you guys get it? If you just show some, just my goodness.
No, because men are nervous. And so what they're doing is they're trying to figure out how to engage her and try to impress her, because a man's directive is to be the alpha male and be impressive. See, so it's a conflicting thing.
Right.
I mean, as a man, you need to be the bull elephant.
Right.
And the bull elephant has taken down a bunch of things, the hunter, the warrior.
Right.
So it is a little bit important.
How's that working for those guys?
Well, I think there's got to be a combination. I think there has to be a combination. I think there has to be I can stand solid in my warrior stance and ask you, how do you feel about something?
Right.
And that's the question. How do you feel about that? Well, I noticed that you're drinking this particular drink. Why is that? I mean, it can be something that seemingly inane.
And actually, that's a very good point, because I'm thinking back about a gal I met through a speed dating thing. It always cracked me up as it didn't work out. And I think it was a phone call or an email or something. She goes, "You asked too many questions."
Right.
Gosh, I thought that was a smart thing to do.
Right. And, so I mean, it is different. So there has to be both. And talking of speed dating, I'm starting, I don't know if you heard about this, but I'm starting Tantra speed dating.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, in November.
Wonderful.
You can go to my website and look at that. But Tantra speed dating is going to rock the world in terms of how speed dating works.
Excellent.
Because there's not going to be any of this worry about whether you're talking too much or not talking. And nobody's getting naked. So just to reiterate that. But, yeah, I think that dating is confusing for everybody. But part of it is that people aren't comfortable in their own skin.
Right.
And men are really getting we got two types of men going on now. We've got the super macho beyond, out of control, and then we've got the super watered down men.
Right.
And it's like trying to find that middle ground, because women want strong men.
You bet.
They really do. And I mean, I'm a super strong woman, and trying to find a man that's, can stand in that space is pretty tough. I don't want to be intimidating.
Well, and certainly intelligence will intimidate men if the woman's too smart or makes too much money or whatever. But it always goes back to something that I never practiced, but I always liked the bad boy deal. It was why did this bad boy, I did very well, but why did that bad boy get all those women or whatever? And it was going back to that whole piece around self-esteem and how somebody viewed themselves. So.
Right. Well, part of why the bad boy gets the good rap a lot of the time is because of the sexual energy. Now, a lot of bad boys are standing in a very masculine stance of sexual energy, and that's really attractive.
Interesting.
And so if we could have the bad boy, or not even the bad part, but the sexual energy that those men stand in,
right?
With the good man, that's what we really want. So we don't really want the bad boys, but we're almost like helpless with them because that sexual energy is so charged when they're there.
Right. Well, that's like it's been said, and I've talked to buddies of mine about this. They wish they'd have 4 versions of a wife. And there's the smart one and the homemaker one and the sexual one and the playful one, the one wants to go hunting with him or whatever.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, and whether are men picking their best friends to date, somehow men always think that the girl that's their best friend is not the one that's off limits sexually.
Right.
Right? Isn't that weird?
Right. Oh,
and
true.
Then there's the sexual one.
True.
But then again, men like us to be ladies outside the bedroom and then the whores inside the bedroom. And women don't generally make that transition well.
Right.
A woman that's super stiff outside is not going to make that transition.
And it is interesting because I've always thought that's a great question, is the ones that go from there's the sexual attraction that goes through that, and then maybe they get married and sometimes that blows up in their face. But there's the ones that become best friends and eventually get married, but they started in the friend piece, which seems to make so much more sense. Women that have been friends of mine in the past, we've run into each other later. It's often come up. They say, "Well, I actually had a really big crush on you."
Oh yeah.
And I go, "Well, we didn't want to wreck it. We were just friends." And there's always that neat thing about having a male or a female that'll ask you questions you're going to get honest answers from that you won't from most. And there was always that piece between a boy.
Well, I think both sexes need friends of the opposite sex. But I think men need good men friends too.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think that I feel very fortunate to have a lot of male friends and some very close ones. And I'm always surprised about how I've got a number of people I know, friends, acquaintances, have zero friends. And I think that's such a shame, because it's that you need them of both sides of the aisle, if you will. And they can bring so much. And there's so many women I've had over friends over the years. I could ask that question, that there is no hidden agenda, and I got the real answer I needed. And it was really neat.
Right. Well, we're missing tribe today. We're very much missing our tribes. Right. And we were created to be in a tribe. And so I think this isolation that we're creating is, the isolation that we're living in is creating a lot of problems. And I think it's becoming one of those things where, I talk about touch deprivation. That a lot of people get into relationships simply because they don't get touch anywhere else.
Right.
And that's pretty sad. And it's something we could do with our friends. Right. It's okay to grab your friend's hand, put your friends there. You talked about, if I can bring this up, about your relationship with your son. Right. That you have this extraordinary son, and because you're okay to cry with him, he's okay to cry, and you still at 14?
Yeah, 14.
You actually still hug him.
Yeah. Oh, you bet. Of course, now the one thing, Tanja, I must say, which is so sad, is not around school though.
Right.
That's finally changed, and there's a few. But I've been very spoiled. I used to I keep my fingers crossed and just look to the sky. Can I just hang on a little bit longer? And we've made it to not quite 14 and a half, almost 15, and I feel so fortunate because it's such an important thing. And you mentioned tribe too. This whole idea of the single parents, and there isn't this family unit. Right. And I remember growing up, and you didn't hear the word divorce. And so that part of that, and I was from a very, very huggy, touchy family. On my mother's side, on my father's side, it was all shaking hands. And it didn't feel right at all, and there was no I love you. And so that's why, if you have both parents that have that, it can just be such a great experience for your model.
Well, I think a lot of men are afraid of physical contact because they only get it sexually. And so what happens is, around their children, they're afraid at a certain age, they start pushing kids away because of their sexual, they might have a sexual response. When your little daughter jumps into bed in the morning with you and accidentally, hits your penis on the way by with her knee, and you end up with an erection, most men freak out.
Right.
And the reality is, your penis didn't know the difference.
Sure.
Okay, it's your intent of what you're doing when you're cuddling with your child.
Right.
Right? If you don't have a problem, your child's not going to have a problem. But there's those times when your daughter or your son sits in your lap and it's like, oops, and, you push them away.
Right.
And what they get from that is your abandonment. I'm not worthy. You don't want to be with me. You don't want to touch me. There's something wrong with me.
That's true.
See, they're not getting the other side of that.
Well, and I must say, too, that I think there are some breakthroughs that are happening. I was thinking, as you said, that the non-touchy. And I notice now with most of my buddies, we shake hands, but we always pull in the hug, too.
Awesome.
That didn't happen before.
No.
And that's really, really been kind of cool. And it is funny because this, and I know that massage and a lot of things have helped that, but this human touch. In fact, it's so interesting because if I reach over and touch you to make a point, I've been told you're going to listen even more carefully.
Of course, you're anchoring that, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly, anchoring. Right. And yet, in the retail world, for instance, when I was at Nordstrom, and you went from the big hugs to the side hug to the touch on the shoulder, the touch on the arm, till in the end, you didn't touch anybody.
Right.
And we know why, of course.
Right.
So it's just so sad because that anchoring is so important.
Right. Well, we feel cared for. We feel loved when we're touched. Touch is the thing that starts it off all in the beginning. If more men and mothers were to hold and touch their sons, instead of telling them to get up off the ground, stop being a baby.
Right.
These things, men don't cry, that type of thing. Right. We would have those men that could grow up in a solid masculine foundation with the sensitivity and the caring. True. And actually liking women.
True. And I go back to something of my mother's that was still the most powerful, is that I must have heard this 1,000 times. You can do and be anything you want in this life if you just set your mind to it. It was never you're stupid or you're not this or that or whatever. And she would also say, look, let me explain something to you. Life is not easy. It's hard and it's not fair. But you know what? If you set your mind to it, and if you get just that basis, that going back to how you view yourself and the touching and feeling comfortable with all that and all those hugs and things, it was just, oh, goodness, it was just
so
wonderful.
It's created an extraordinary man who now has created extraordinary kids. Now, you have two? One.
Older, 24-year-old. And the 12 and the 14-year-old.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And extraordinary men out there now walking the world. Thank you for all of us women.
You bet.
These things can happen, and they're completely real. What did you, I have to ask you, what did you tell your sons, because you raised them mostly single, right? For a good portion of it,
correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. What did you tell them about masturbation, self-pleasuring?
Well, what was interesting is that the thing, as the questions came up, the thing is, I never sat down necessarily, well, now we're going to have the birds and the bees things, but the questions would come up, and I was always very comfortable answering them. And it was always, and I remember even one day, Connor, was so exactly how does this penis, does this go into the woman, or how does it just go the way it is, and what's this, it has to be, and it was very natural. And I think what also probably kind of helped, now that I think about it, Tanja, is that it wasn't just sex, and it was drinking and smoking and drugs and sex, and it was that whole discussion around, well, can you tell me about this, Dad? And I think it certainly helps if you set a great example, if you don't do these things yourself, too.
Sure.
But it was never, there was never, again, like my mother, there was never a question that was off limits.
And that started at a very young age.
Very young.
Once when they asked a question did you go, oh, my God, don't talk about that. We just don't talk about that around the house.
Or I always hear this, talk to your mother, talk to your father. They'd push it off to the other person. But and in my case, I mean, my father never talked about any of that, so it was strictly my mother. Right. And so I guess if you're in a divorced family and you end up with the one that doesn't talk about it, it's tough.
It's going to be harder.
But getting back to your question, it was just, I think it's always allowed for this very, very comfortable forum, again, like my mom, where it was nothing, it was never, we don't talk about that, or that's a stupid question, or don't,
So do you feel that educating your sons was permissive? I mean, telling them, oh, now go out and run out and have lots of sex?
No, I think it was the knowledge was making them very comfortable with who and what they were. And I think it goes back to this, I use the word demystify, I'm not sure if that's what I want to say. It's just that when you talk, there's nothing secretive here. It's not like you're doing something bad and you don't worry about it. And I think that's the same way they both approached it. It seemed very natural. Oh, okay, well, that's good. All right, I'll talk to you later. Right. Versus this is something, this is, Dad's not talking about this. We should find out more about this.
Right, more about this, or we're going to have to experiment on our own with this, or we're going to go worse yet, we're going to go out and seek the porn version of this, which is going to be really sad.
Right.
So, David, this has been an amazing conversation with, once I say, an amazing man, and I'm sure we'll have more
I hope so.
Great conversations as you rocket into the world of motivational speaking. I think you're definitely cut out for that.
Thank you.
And I want everybody to know that you can always email in questions if you have them. If you're too embarrassed to give us a call, you can email me and I'll read the questions on the air in the next section. We've got Catherine Scott coming in next week, who is the dating coach, and she's a whole lot of fun. And I've got a bunch of classes going on. You can get to my site at www.learningtantra.com to get signed up for those, both in Seattle and Vancouver. Intriguing classes like the multi-orgasmic man and tantric exercises for increasing your length, girth, and stamina. Yes, that's true. As well as Tantra speed dating coming up in November. Please drop me an email anytime, and really, really enjoyed having you. David, any final words you want to let anybody know?
No, but I was going to say on that, what was that first class about the increasing
increasing your length, girth, multi-orgasmic
not that
man.
One, the one right before.
Multi-orgasmic man, he's there.
Have we got a sign-up sheet here?
He's there.
Always want to improve.
He's headed for the class. That's right. So thank you all very much for tuning in today, and Gary's going to let me know if I should keep talking here and say goodbye. Oh, I've got 4 minutes. I can keep talking. Oh, yay! Look at that. I was jumping the gun. Sorry, you guys. So I had one other burning question to you. How was it you decided marriage, that woman?
Great question. And I think there's two questions, both the individual woman that I met and thought, boy, this, not subconsciously, but consciously almost, the checklist of everything had kind of lined up the way I saw it. But I think also, I remember thinking after my wife passed away 10 years ago, I'll never get married again. There's no need for it. I can raise the kids by myself and so forth, and if I can have a relationship. But I also realized that, to me, my view on marriage changed from all this living together, shacking up, whatever you want to call it, and that is it's still only a partial commitment, at least to me. And it was kind of like, I can always leave if this doesn't work out. I've just got my bags. There's no connection. So it completely changed, and I noticed that now, a couple years later, it still is this commitment that I've got that makes it so much more solid, that I always will look at it a little differently than it's just something I can, in this throwaway society we live in.
It's about intent.
It sure is.
Once again, the intent, it comes through in everything that we do.
Yeah.
So as you walk into the world today, people, I want you to contemplate your intent. That comes everything from touching somebody. What is your intent? Because you can touch somebody and make them feel great. You can touch somebody and make them feel horrible. When I talked last week about love, I said all love is the same. It's just depending on what your intent is, whether it's your child or romantic partner. Gratitude, big for people.
Very big.
I know you're big into gratitude, and so I am. And I am so grateful to have talked to you. Speaking of that, great segue. I am grateful for Gary, our wonderful producer, who has great things going on for his life because he keeps giving me the minute signs. I'm grateful for actually being able to be here and helping to educate and empower people about all these wonderful things. And you had told me that gratitude changed your life around.
Well, I don't know how much time we have left, but just one real quick thing. My entry the other day at the 10-year mark was not about how tough my 10 years had been, but by living in gratitude and having this law of attraction, and the attitude of gratitude is this woman that passed away 10 years ago gave me the greatest gift a person could ever give anybody else, my son. And what a different way to look at the same event.
Right.
And so it just completely reframed my day as it did every day. And there's a very good chance, about a 99% chance, you will be in the journal tomorrow.
Yay!
So just know that entry will be in there with Tanja Diamond. So
we'll be all spending our lives in gratitude.
You bet.
Sex is not a luxury, people. Sex is one of our major biological drives, and I think if we learn how to do it in an incredible, connected, intentful format, I think we can change the world with that. I do believe that it's true. You told me that you believe it's the cement that holds relationships together.
You bet.
And I think we need to start looking at it as a whole different ballgame. I'm Tanja Diamond, your sexual intimacy expert, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week about Tantra, love, sex, and intimacy. Thanks again, David, and we're out.
You have been listening to the Tantra, Love, Sex, and Intimacy Show with your host, Tanja Diamond. Don't miss next week's show at Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Until then, visit our website at www.tanjadiamond.com. That's TANJA for more information on workshops and classes.